Thanks for having me. As a brief introduction, I'm a real estate consultant based in Midtown, and we were retained by the city. Well, this background slide will describe it the best. To basically determine how the changing office world is going to impact the city's tax revenue moving forward. I'm going to try to keep most of this fairly high level because there's a bunch of data and statistics and numbers in here, but just to touch on a few high-level points. In fiscal year 24, which was technically last year, property taxes accounted for 37% of the city's total property tax revenue. Of that, the office properties accounted for about 6.5% of total revenue for the city. So just to frame it, broadly speaking, in terms of how much the city's office stock, accounts for the total revenue for the city. And this just puts it a little bit easier to comprehend and digest, if you will. So the total office stock has remained relatively unchanged over the last 20 years in the city. There's only been one speculative multi-tenant office building over 300,000 square feet that's been built in the last 20 years, which is pretty amazing when you think about, the amount of development that's happened elsewhere in the city. So I guess you can read into that a few different ways, but, one takeaway that we had from this exhibit was that, you're pretty much where you were in '08, and you experienced a pretty significant drop, in 13, 14, 15, and yet you managed just fine. So point is, what's looming or what's to come has been endured before by the city. This just looks at just a quick breakdown, if you're curious, of the revenue by type. And again, on the pie chart to the right just kind of summarizes how property tax revenue accounts for it all. And again, that's total property tax revenue, not just office. And then within the office stock, what we did was we tried to parse out medical office from conventional office, because the medical office world has been impacted not nearly as significantly as conventional office in terms of, this post-COVID hybrid work phenomenon. So you'll see towards the end how we're trying to treat the impact of medical office different than conventional. And as you'll see on the far right pie chart, this just looks at the composition of office stock. And, the way we try to look at it is 3/4 of the office stock in the city is over 100,000 in buildings that are over 100,000 square feet. And those are the buildings which are arguably going to be greater impacted than the smaller, Williamsburg type office buildings that don't have as many tenants, are typically more owner occupied, et cetera. So again, 75% of the stock is in the larger office buildings. This is just looking at, Metro Atlanta trends. Again, not to get mired in it all, but one main takeaway is the sublease inventory is what's really undercutting the broader office market right now. And when you look at the far right in the pie chart in the middle, Central Perimeter, which is where Sandy Springs is a third of that sublease inventory. And when you look at it even more broadly, the suburban sublease space is about 3/4 of the sublease space on the market. But if you were, it's not in here, but if you were to look at how much sublease space has grown since COVID, it's drastic. And I'm happy to pull that stat at the end if you're curious. And the reason that that's so important, just to touch on it for a second, is, rents in Central Perimeter are in the mid-30s per square foot, call it $34 a square foot, where that sublease space, they're offering rents at $22 a foot. So if you have a building where, you're trying to lease, as they say, direct space, and you're competing with that sublease space, it just undercuts your efforts of trying to lease the space when there's that big of a spread. The purpose of this exhibit, and again, not trying to paint an overly negative picture, but the numbers don't lie, it just is what it is. The trend of this kind of declining demand in office space is not a new phenomenon. You could really rewind back to the post.com bust, where the need for office space has been slowing. It's just that COVID kind of poured gas on that fire and on that trend, and frankly, more than anything, it empowered employees more than it ever has before, which has in turn, led employers to make tougher decisions. But specifically in Central Perimeter, what's driven the Central Perimeter office market for so long has been these large Fortune 500 companies and tech companies. They've liked the central location of the market and the convenience to all the suburban locations. Well, those are the type of tenants that are pulling back more than anyone, these large Fortune 500 companies. And frankly, while it's not in the city, it's in Dunwoody. State Farm's kind of the best example of that right now in terms of just they came out with very aggressive kind of restructuring plans. COVID happened, and now they're pulling back significantly. So what we did is we profiled 34 office buildings in the city, which are located.
Just hold on a second.
Yes.
Go back to that last slide.
Yes.
Because we've had a precipitous change in the last 12 months. We went from, this is the absorption numbers.
Correct.
So we just had a sudden, in 2023, lack of absorption. That's 1.3 million square feet that was not absorbed. What is that, the sublease? Is that what is being subleased now, or is it just sitting vacant? What's the deal?
People vacating space, people taking less space. One trend that's certainly evident right now is when companies are leasing new space or renewing space, it's almost always less space than they formerly occupied. So not to say that accounts for all of those numbers, but it certainly, factors into it. 2023
when a lot of those leases began to expire? Is that another factor?
It is, but that's, it's a rolling kind of thing. It's, I guess, obviously it's hard to say what the future holds, but in our opinion, it's not a trend that's going to reverse itself anytime soon. Is the simplest way to summarize it.
How much of that is State Farm?
Turn on your mic, please.
The question was how much of it was State Farm. That's a good question. I don't know the exact amount, but what I understand is that State Farm really, while they're not occupying, they've got about 1.7 million square feet there. It's unclear how much they're occupying. They put a fair amount on the market for sublease, and they had that deal with Carvana, if y'all remember that. Well, then Carvana had their own issues and basically backed out of that sublease, and I think State Farm took it off the market. So the point of that is to say there's a lot of kind of vacant space out there from State Farm that's really not in these sublease numbers. But the other thing I'll mention is the other trend that's happened post-COVID is folks or companies are looking for walkability. They're looking for, access to walkable amenities, the Beltline, yada, yada, yada. Everybody reads about it in the paper all the time. But when you look at Sandy Springs office stock, it's older and it's not nearly as walkable. And so that's just, that's a negative moving forward, and that's just a reality. And the city and the Central Perimeter area can try to do as much as they can to negate that, but some things are just, if you're in that concourse complex, you're not likely to walk to High Street, even though it's not that far of a walk. You're more likely to be in Midtown or by the old Fourth Ward where Pond City Market is, et cetera. So we profiled 34 office buildings, and I guess we kind of categorized the two main office districts in Sandy Springs are the new North Side 285 area and Central Perimeter. And I guess a few takeaways. And again, this is 60% of the rentable square feet within the city. So we felt like it was a decent gauge of how the market's performing. One takeaway is that the vacancy rate is about 33%. Rents are higher in Central Perimeter, but one of the purposes of this exhibit is arguably the market peaked in 2019. So what we wanted to see was how values have dropped on the tax rolls between 19 and 23, because just without getting in the weeds, the values never get to where they should. And that's just a fact. Like when the tide's rising, the tax assessor never values them where they necessarily should. So it's not as easy as saying, well, values have dropped X percent, so the tax roll is going to drop accordingly, because the values were never marked where they should have been in 19, if that makes sense. So the part of the purpose of this exercise was just to look at, from a tax assessor standpoint, how much they've dropped from 19 to 23, and they've dropped about 7%, and they're now at $173 a square foot. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, hopefully it will by the end of this, and I'm happy to go back to it. So we looked at 8 properties where they contested their taxable value last year to the Fulton County tax assessor. And you can see in the far right column, so they challenged it. What they challenged it for is unclear, but what it was settled at was a 14% decline. So what they challenged it for on the tax rolls in 23 was X, and then Y, it was a 14% decline from that point. So we just thought that was illustrative to see mainly how the tax assessor is handling these these contestations, or whatever the phrase is, because we talked to the tax assessor in the course of this analysis, and they're not going to voluntarily lower the values, just like they're not spiking. They're kind of steady eddy. So a lot of it is depending on who contests and when they contest. And most of the people in this room probably know, but just as a reminder, when you contest and you win your appeal, the values are then frozen for 3 years. They did change the policy recently, which I think is a good move, that if you contest and I think they're about to implement it, if you contest and you do not win the appeal, then your values are not frozen. Right. So hopefully that'll dissuade some people from contesting in general, just for the spirit of freezing their values for 3 years, even if they don't win. All right, the medical office market, don't need to get too in the weeds on this, because frankly we just don't think it's nearly as impacted, as I said before, in this whole changing of the tide. But you can see that the vacancy rate, broadly speaking, was 12% versus 27%, and of the 9 buildings that we looked at, there's a 6% vacancy rate. And values actually rose between 19 and 23, if you look at the far right column for that, which we found interesting. All right. What this is a lot of numbers on a page, but just high level. It's a way to explain why values have dropped like they have. And the things to focus on are the vacancy rate. Well, the rent, for one. So this is just taking a 350,000 square foot building, right? No particular building, just saying that it had that rent in 19, $29.50, and $31 a foot in 23. And again, this is all based on central perimeter averages. Vacancy rate rose from 18.2 to 26.8. Expenses rose 2% a year, and capitalization rates rose 250 basis points. And that 250 basis points was based on conversations with brokers and whatnot that are out there. Well, without going through all the math, you can see the impact in value from 19 to 23. And that's echoed in some of the recent sales and just in conversations with the leading office sales brokers out there, that it's essentially the rising vacancy rate, but most importantly, the rising capitalization rates and the impact that they've had on the value of office buildings. Just broadly speaking, over that period of time. So, takeaways, conclusions. Large multi-tenant buildings should experience the most significant value decline moving forward. In our opinion, the 14% value decline that we saw in 23 is a good barometer for what to expect this year. The medical office market should not be nearly as impacted, so value adjustment should not be as significant. And in our opinion, buildings under 100,000 square feet, which is 23.5% of the city's stock, should experience a smaller decline because they're less dependent on corporate tenants and more of the buildings are owner-occupied. And then lastly, single-tenant buildings like UPS and Cox should experience a smaller value decline than multi-tenant buildings. So if you look at the middle column, potential value discount, we attributed a different discount for the 4 different categories. We put a 15% discount on the larger multi-tenant buildings that we surveyed, 7.5% on the single tenant. The conventional office that we didn't survey, which is a smaller space, 10%, and then medical office, 5%. And when you do all that math, it works out to about an 11% decline. So, obviously, there's plenty of holes you can poke in the assumptions, but that was our best guess at what it does to the impact. And if you look at the far right, that results in a $850,000 decline in the city's revenue for this year if you attribute an 11% decline. What we did here, not to scare anyone, but it's really just a sensitivity analysis of saying, okay, what if looking down the road over the next 5 years, 10 years, what have you, if just values continue to precipitously decline. And so, again, the figures in the box are just a sensitivity analysis saying, what is the impact of that value decline under different assumptions? And if you go to the worst case, which is a 40% decline across the board, which is, I wouldn't say highly unlikely, but it's unlikely anytime soon, that results in a $3 million decline in revenue. But I guess what's interesting for us is even as drastic as that is, it's still only a 2.6% decline in the city's overall revenue. So take it for what you will, but that was an interesting, I guess, thing that we noticed. So our recommendations moving forward. Yes.
That's over what period of time?
No specific period of time. We're certainly not saying this is going to happen in a 1-year period. We're just saying that, if you're looking now and trying to anticipate the city's revenue over the next 5 to 10 years, if they did drop this significantly, this is the impact it would have compared to fiscal year 24. You're welcome. So first recommendation is to assume what we said on the page before of an 11% decline, which would result in a less than 1% decline in the city's total revenue. However, this decline ultimately depends on how many property valuations are appealed and what the results of those are. Go back. Oh, I'm sorry. Second recommendation, the city should anticipate further erosion in overall office market values for the foreseeable future and should proactively explore which properties are better suited for other land uses moving forward to encourage redevelopment in these locations through the zoning and other incentives. 3 reasons for this. 1, it removes potential blight. It reduces the office supply, which benefits the rest of the market. It increases tax revenue with new development. And then lastly, it's kind of self-explanatory, but we're in a volatile time right now with the office market, and it's hard to say what next year holds. So you should just, you don't need to do as deep of a dive as this, but to just kind of monitor it moving forward to update a study like this. But that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to any slides.
All right. Any questions? Mr. Paulson, as our representative on the PCID board, this is something that they probably should be very interested in.
Okay. So I'll be interested in her take. I've not heard back from her, but other than thanks. If you go back to one of your earlier slides, you had the valuation over the last 10 years. It was like your second or third slide. Where is that? There we go. So let's assume the recession of 08-09 had its effect 5 years later in 2013, 2014, and started to climb out of that. Your conclusion is that you don't think this is going to repeat. And so why don't you think that this phenomenon of it recovering over time is going to happen?
I don't.
I know you don't. I'm asking why.
Why do I not? I think the genie's out of the bottle in terms of just how office space is going to be utilized moving forward. When you look at Metro Atlanta in general, there's just too much of it. And again, in my opinion, whether it's now or 3 or 4 years from now, when these large corporate tenants when their space comes up to renew or move, it's going to be in the back of their mind what happened in these last couple of years. And I just think it's going to emotionally, and the mindset of tenants moving forward is going to be more cautious, and they're just not going to need as much space. And so that, coupled with the fact that the office stock is older here, it just does not position, it's certainly not going to zero by any means, but it doesn't, that when you look at what the central perimeter office market has to offer, it's not as compelling as other parts of the city. And so what we've witnessed anyway is that where the development's occurring, both from an office standpoint, multifamily, et cetera, but more so just new office development, it's West Midtown, and the Old Fourth Ward. And those are kind of the shift that's occurred is, in the old days, as in the last couple decades, tenants chose to occupy where the decision makers lived, right? And they wanted to be close to where they lived for the convenience of it. Now they're trying to occupy where the workforce lives. And so that's why, a lot of these tech-oriented companies are trying to be as close to Georgia Tech as possible, because that's kind of the epicenter of the city now. So the closer they can get to that talent and where the talent wants to live, that's where they're trying to be. So that was a lengthy answer to your question.
No.
Where it bottoms out is anybody's guess. I guess the encouraging takeaway, though, is that this isn't unprecedented for the city.
Sure. Oh, I
Yep.
get that part.
Yep.
In fact, the residential real estate was even further impacted during 11, 12, 13.
Yes.
So that had a bigger impact on our budget than hopefully this is going to have. Then the other one is you have older office space here, but you also have MARTA in Sandy Springs. We've got three MARTA stops in Sandy Springs. Why doesn't that count when it comes to office space being occupied? Because workers can get here more easily because MARTA's here than Cumberland or some of these other areas where they don't have MARTA. In fact, what's your thought on that, I guess?
I have a few thoughts on it. My on-the-record thought's probably a little different than my off-the-record thought, but
Give us both. Come on now. It's just us talking.
I think being on MARTA is great, but it's still Atlanta, and especially when you think about where most of the workforce comes for Central Perimeter, it's not so much about MARTA, because arguably that's a reverse commute, where if you live in Midtown and you're hopping on MARTA to go to Central Perimeter, versus if you're coming from Gwinnett County, Cobb, Alpharetta, you're not hopping on MARTA. So it's nice. I would argue that the MARTA stations in Central Perimeter are better from a residential standpoint than from an office standpoint, because it gives you clean access into the city, to commute in to work. But it certainly doesn't hurt. How much it helps, I would argue that it's not. I'll give you a case that negates that argument. There's no MARTA at Old Fourth Ward, and that's now considered the best office district in Atlanta when you look at the rents and the development activity. So I think the dynamics are just shifting a little bit in terms of why people want to, locate their offices where they do. And there's no doubt that the Beltline is, it's a huge driver now, because people can bike and walk to work.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Mr. DiGiulio.
I didn't notice anywhere in the report if you put any recommendations of things that the city could do to try to offset some of this decline, such as encourage redevelopment, encourage upscaling of some of these older properties, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a reason you didn't put any of that in the report?
Well, one of the recommendations at the end was to, I guess it might be different depending on how you look at it, but the second one is more so, I guess I would say, wholesale redevelopment, where you're scraping the site. The talks of converting buildings to residential get a lot of press, but they're very challenging, especially in the suburbs, which, depending on who you talk to, some people say this is the suburbs, some people don't, but regardless, it's challenging even in the core of Atlanta, much less in Sandy Springs. So you could try to densify the site by developing some of the parking lot and preserving the office, The challenge there then is the ratio for parking that has to be offered to the office, because if you do that, you typically have to replace that parking in a deck, and it just kind of messes up the the numbers. So reinvesting in the office buildings is great, and certain landlords are doing that. I mean, I've noticed just in some of those Glen Lake buildings and whatnot, they're trying to think of more creative ways to offer amenities, et cetera. But, I mean, look at Concourse. They've seen millions of dollars of reinvestment, and the King and Queen I want to say they're 35% vacant each. So there's only so much you can do, I guess, I would say, from that front. I think if I had to guess, in the next couple of years, the movement is going to be redevelopment of some of these office buildings that are low density. When you look at it, some people refer to it as a fried egg, but when you look at a building that's in the middle of a site and has surface parking all around it, and it's 15 acres at New North Side, that's a redevelopment site. That's not going to be an office property moving forward, at least not a dynamic one. So I think it's thinking proactively before you get those rezoning requests of what does the city want that to be. Like how can we start to reimagine certain areas and certain properties before the developers start knocking on the door, not dissimilar to what you did with the shopping centers, up the Roswell Road corridor, of perhaps identifying a few of them to say, hey, the writing's starting to be on the wall here, but it's good fundamental real estate, and it's similar but different to what's happened to some of the malls, right? Malls located in areas for a reason, because they're close to good demographics, convenient location, et cetera. Same with a lot of these office buildings. So the location is not the problem, it's the product. And so, at some number, they're going to have to trade hands. There's a lot of debt coming due, and people are going to be hit hard on the equity side of it. But once that new basis is established and it trades hands to the next owner, it offers opportunity, I guess I would say.
Let me, and then Ms. Rochelle. Normally, looking at the valuations that have declined, at this point in the business cycle, you would expect that investors would come in and start scooping these buildings up. And that's not happening. Is that leading you to believe that that one of the factors that's leading you to believe that the market's not coming back anytime soon?
That office investors are not scooping them up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, without naming names, just having sat down with a few of them recently, that's their business. To quote one of the CEOs, he said, in these past cycles, it was a timing thing, and we knew that it was going to come back, and we were just going to wait it out. He's like, it's different this time because we can't anticipate what demand's going to be. And that's what's different this time around than past cycles, is there was confidence that the demand was going to be there. Now there's not that confidence. So not only is it hard to underwrite, but it's hard to attract capital for that same reason.
I guess for those of us who are policymakers, I mean, first of all, we've got to sit down with the perimeter CID and start talking about this. We're going to probably need to do some market studies similar to what we did with some of the as you indicated, some of the strip malls that we wanted to see redeveloped. This has a much greater impact, not on just Sandy Springs, Dunwoody, and Brookhaven, but across the metro area. I mean, this has been a huge jobs creator for this region for over 50 years. And it's much easier to intervene before things get in a spiral. So we've got to try and figure out how we incentivize some of this. Do you have any ideas? I mean, people have talked to me about, well, why don't we put some really nice restaurants on the top of these tall buildings with beautiful views all over the metro Atlanta area? But one restaurant's probably not going to change much, right?
Yeah, they're trying that at B of A Plaza right now, so I guess we'll see how that plays out. But it's not cheap, to go and put a restaurant up at the top of a building. But I know where you're going with the question. I think I do anyway, of how do you make the area more compelling to office tenants? And that's I guess that's not a simple answer. I think you have to look at it in certain areas, certain pockets of the city, and treat it differently depending on the situation.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask the question this way then. Do you have any examples of where older office districts have revitalized by bringing in restaurants, nightlife? What are the amenities, I guess, that would help move this needle in the right direction?
Restaurants, like it or not, the density helps. Residential density helps. But yes, for instance, we're in Midtown, and there's a lot to be said for being able to walk to go get lunch every day. Otherwise, you could go locate anywhere you want. So people are locating in certain areas for that walkability and to be close to where they live. But I think more than anything, the walkability to cultural amenities. So, there's a lack of green space in Central Perimeter. I'm not sure how you conquer that given that everything's developed, but that's something, to think about is that there's just, again, I haven't given much thought to the question, but there is a lack of green space there. And I think, High Street's going to be a great thing to watch because it hadn't opened yet, right? And hopefully that'll be a great kind of magnet to see what spawns around it. But, what they're doing at Campus 244, which is the former Gold Kist headquarters,
Right.
That's a great local example. They rehabbed an older building, gave it a fresh look. They're now building a new one. They're building a hotel. But it takes deep pockets and somebody with some ambition like Roca Point and Georgetown Companies is doing there, but it's been successful. I guess the only flip side is it hasn't been, it's kind of like musical chairs. When you get those buildings in, they're just siphoning off from other buildings versus bringing in new tenants. I do think, though, that over the long term, Atlanta's going to greatly benefit from all the shifts in these gateway cities. There's going to be corporate relocations coming here. And so it's not, the office market's not in dire straits by any means. There's just too much of it. I think that's the key takeaway.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Rochelle?
Well, you asked a lot of the questions I was going to ask. This is a great study. I really learned a lot, and I appreciate it. I guess one of the questions, I understand if the reinvestment from other office buildings, but what about do you see very many buildings that might be going up for foreclosure or going into bankruptcy, some of these, and then they can be redeveloped into other things besides office buildings? That's kind of what I'm imagining. And also, of the 34 office buildings and the others in Sandy Springs, do you have did you do a deep dive into the individual offices so that we can take a look at it and see what the vacancy rates are and which ones might
buildings. Yes. Yeah, this
And-
book,
It's
this
in your
book,
book.
which y'all have a
Oh, they
copy
are?
of.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
that's
that
got
information.
all the scoop that is behind these
Okay.
numbers.
I'll probably see it, I just don't
Um,
remember.
Your first question about, I guess, values resetting from the stress, it feels like, the dominoes haven't fallen yet, but there's signs that, I don't know if y'all are familiar with that one in Midtown called 14th and Spring. It was built by Greenstone a couple years ago. It's been vacant ever since. It's under contract reportedly in the low 200s a foot. To build that today, that would cost $550, $600 a foot. And so there's been the kicking the can down the road, not dissimilar to the Great Recession, the whole pretend and extend. But I think that it's been done with the hopes that things are going to change. Either rates are going to drop, which it doesn't seem like that's going to happen, or conditions are going to improve. And so I think as the debt starts to come due, they're going to have a hard time refinancing, and some of these properties are going to either get foreclosed upon or just, somebody's going to buy the note and at a significant discount. And
The building you're talking about at Spring and 14th, is that going to continue to be office, or are they?
it's going to continue to be office, just at a significantly lower basis. But I guess the takeaway with that is that they've been trying to lease that for years unsuccessfully. They don't want to sell it, at that value. But I think that it's coming to a lifetime that they've got to figure out a solution. And, I guess the one example I can think of, not that it was necessarily distressed, but if you're familiar with Ashford Green, which is in Brookhaven, but by Perimeter Summit, I'm pretty sure anyway, they're looking to convert that building to senior housing, which will be interesting to see how that plays out. They're densifying the surface lot, I think, with apartments, and then they're converting the building to senior housing. The challenge, of course, is that all these buildings have leases in place, so you can't just overnight redevelop it. You got to wait for the leases to burn off. But Embassy Row, that's a recent example. That just sold at a significant discount, and my understanding is that I think there's a plan to shuffle some tenants around and redevelop a portion of the site. And so, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Certain buildings like Concourse, they're not going anywhere, but the ones that are less dense, kind of longer in the tooth in terms of their value, I think there's more opportunity for that. Did that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Dr. Kelly.
Yes, just a couple of questions. Thank you. Was the northern part of the city sort of outside of the scope of your work?
It wasn't, but just in the attempt to, I guess, again, our thesis being to focus on the larger buildings, that's where most of them are concentrated. There are a few larger ones up top, but no, we turned this around in 2 weeks. So we tried to take a very concerted effort of what our methodology was. So we weren't intentionally ignoring the northern side, but that was just there's just not as much office inventory up there, at least in the larger buildings.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Ladson, this is phenomenal work. It's very helpful, not only to the city manager in trying to get the budget put together, but also to help us start focusing on some policy recommendations, working with the building owners over there and the property owners to start looking at some plans to jumpstart that area. And it's a challenge, but something we need to start getting on. But thank you.
You're
for
welcome.
your work.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Okay. Next item is the Powers Ferry Multimodal Circulation Study. Mr. Martin.
Mayor and Council, good evening. Over the past year or so, we've conducted the Powers Ferry Multimodal Study to take a deeper dive into transportation requirements and make recommendations for future improvements within this very small but relatively diverse in terms of land use Powers Ferry area, and somewhat in response to much so in response, as a matter of fact, in response to the Powers Ferry Small Area Plan performed a few years ago. So with about a year of study, some relatively robust public outreach along the way, I'd like to ask our senior transportation planner, Ms. Caitlin Schenkel, to provide you the information on the study and the recommendations contained therein within the study. Caitlin, if you could.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As Marty said, we're here to present tonight on the final recommendations from the Powers Ferry Transportation Study. As this is a technical study, we are not asking for y'all to take action tonight. Instead, the recommendations will be rolled into the next planning study, whether that be the Transition Master Plan or some similar effort, and prioritize at that time. So to give you an idea of where we're located, so this is the southwest quadrant of the city. It is the western gateway of Sandy Springs. It's adjacent to Cobb County. It is, again, a mix of land uses. There is, albeit a smaller regional employment center there, surrounded by several residential neighborhoods. There's 2 local schools within the study area itself, some small-scale retail on New Northside Drive, and it is right next to the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area, so pretty diverse. Like Maria said, we kicked this off about a year ago in April, and we really did want to do a technical study of the recommendations from the Pirates Ferry Small Area Plan, and so we looked at those a little bit closer, as well as identifying anything that was missed in terms of transportation, as well as prioritizing some of those projects and strategies to really kind of develop an implementation plan to move forward. And so we have had 2 rounds of public engagement, the most recent in February, which I'll get into in a minute, and we're here now wrapping up the study. So like I said, we had an open house on February 22nd of this year. We had over 50 people come out, and this is when we wanted to share our recommendations, kind of talk through what we found and what we're envisioning, and then gather feedback from the public and to inform our study. And similarly, we did an online survey that mirrored the public input activities at the meeting. And so 88 participants took the survey, and we got similar feedback from them. And what we heard was folks liked the sidewalk projects. They also gave favorable remarks to the street lighting projects, as well as the wrong-way driving treatments. We have done more robust analysis on New Northside Drive and Northside Drive, which I'll get into in a second. And we had some mixed feedback on that, but when we took in the online survey and the public meeting feedback, it really did come out more 50-50. There were some concerns about potential congestion as well as potential loss of tree canopy, but I'll get into that information in a second when we get into the alternative. But all this input was taken in, and it was fed into the final recommendations prioritization. So Northside Drive. So this is titled Northside Drive. We did analyze both Northside Drive and New Northside Drive. During the process, we really kind of focused in on Northside Drive, with New Northside Drive being more so a long-term vision. But looking at the corridor today, there are several existing deficiencies. Pretty wide travel lanes. Those yellow lines you're seeing, those are not sidewalk. Those are the gaps. And so you can see there really is a lack of sidewalk infrastructure in this area. And it is one-way pairs, and so it's one-way operations in both northbound on New Northside Drive and southbound on Northside Drive. And so there's been many people responding or replying that they've seen a lot of wrong-way driving, and those red dots are where we actually seen crashes in the past 6 years. And then there's general signals need to be brought up to standard, and some pedestrian maintenance needs for ADA ramps and things of that nature. And so with that, we analyzed both of these corridors. We thought about actually making this a 2-way pair, but after looking through all of the impacts and potential safety conflicts that might actually arise from doing wrong-way driving, we ended up with the second alternative of actually just adding some bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Right now, there is excess capacity on the roadway today, and we could actually repurpose some of the excess lanes, and including the deceleration lane and things of that nature, not even complete through lanes, to be a side path with the sidewalk on the other side. Again, focusing in on Northside Drive, because this would actually add connectivity to the new trail built on Interstate North Parkway, as well as what's envisioned for a side path on Powers Ferry Road. New Northside Drive, we did not hear as much of demand for, but we did want to include it in the study as a recommendation in case there was a major redevelopment in the future where you do see more walking, or if GDOT were to replace that bridge one day, we would love to see some enhanced bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. And I mentioned a little bit about the connectivity to Interstate North Parkway as well as Powers Ferry Road. It also would get you better connections over to Cobb County, connecting to those bridges on Interstate North Parkway and Powers Ferry. Having narrower lanes, not too narrow, but 11-foot lanes, would help with traffic calming a little bit as well. And like I mentioned, we're repurposing some of those lanes, and so it's not asking for a lot of new right-of-way. And to the congestion issue, really, we're expecting a level of service to remain acceptable, LOSC. E and F are really the levels of service where you have some issues. LOSC is actually pretty good for the city. And so being able to maintain that is actually not that bad. And it's about $3 million for all the improvements that we just discussed for Northside Drive. And so We fed this into an implementation plan into 3 tiers, along with the other recommendations. And so for short term, these are really focused on the lower cost, easier to implement, didn't need a lot of new funding, so this is kind of the next 5 years or so. Talking about some small gap fill projects for sidewalks, so just minor things that we could really get some bang for your buck. Especially number 1, that's actually connecting to existing sidewalks, so it just brings you to the intersection. Looking at some bike lanes that we can redo with repaving, as well as just some coordination items and thinking about that wrong way safety improvement. So since we're not doing the 2-way conversion, we do want to address wrong way safety improvements, either with signage or striping, and so that's kind of one of the main ticket items for the short term for this area. For midterm, that's when we heard a lot of positive feedback on sidewalks and side paths, and so that's one of our main focus areas for the midterm, and this is something that we would tee up for future funding opportunities, whether it be a renewed SPLOST or some better funding opportunities. Again, focusing in on sidewalks and some street lighting. And finally, long-term recommendations. Again, we don't want to leave any of these gaps out. These could be more expensive projects or might require more coordination with regional partners. But this would be that new North Side Drive segment, as well as some of the larger side path and sidewalks. And so with that, I'll take questions. We will be posting the final report to the website, but again, not asking for any action from y'all today.
Any questions? Mr. Baumann.
Thank you, and thank you for the year's worth of work. And I attended, I think, all of the public sessions, and these were among the most well-attended public input sessions we've had on any project. So for that, I appreciate it. I'm glad to hear the focus is on the low-hanging fruit, the sidewalks, the side paths, the lighting. I think there's a project already teed up, isn't there?
There is.
On Powers Ferry.
Correct. And that includes a mid-block crossing as well.
So that's across it's basically near the townhomes and condos that are across from the Board of Education. Is that right? Correct,
and that will get you to the intersection of Powers Ferry and New
Just
Drive.
2 very specific things I do keep hearing about, and I keep bringing up, is one is the bridge to Cobb County, which, if it were more pedestrian-friendly, particularly if it had any width that would allow for carriages and strollers, that is the key piece of connection for a lot of residents and One River Place and up through the whole corridor over basically under 285 into the river path. So, and I don't think we manage that bridge. I don't think that's our bridge, but hopefully, just let me reiterate the desire of everybody to create that connectivity. 2 other quick things. I had said 2, maybe 3. The one is the down north side from the new roundabout, if we can create some safe, again, connectivity for people to walk down the hill and then get into that network. And then the third thing, from day one that I started serving on this council in 2014, if conditions warrant, anything we can do to assist with residents safely ingressing and egressing from the area around Rays on the River, One River Place. And I know we actually do have a street marking. We're going to have a turn lane that will maybe help a little bit, but I think the egress for folks is the challenge during the morning and the afternoon rush hour. But thanks for listening, everybody. I think hopefully when people see this, they'll calm down, because we haven't suggested 2-way operations on the bridges and massive major modifications. I think you've addressed the concerns.
Great.
Any others? All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Moving to council discussion items. Anybody? All right. We'll move on to the regular order. I'd like to call this meeting of the Sandy Springs City Council to order for Tuesday, May 7th, 2024. Will the city clerk please make the announcements and call the roll?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. First, I'd just like to remind those in attendance, please silence all cell phones or other electronic devices at this time. And also a reminder that individuals who would like to provide public comment at a city council meeting are required to complete and submit a public comment card in advance of the meeting. Those public comment cards are available online and at the chamber entrance. Those providing public comment may be allotted up to 3 minutes to speak on their single chosen topic. As I call roll, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Rusty Paul.
Present.
Councilmember John Paulson. Councilmember Melody Kelly. Councilmember Melissa Mueller.
Present.
Councilmember Jody Rochelle. Councilmember Tiffy DiGiulio. Councilmember Andy Bauman.
Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment cards?
Yes, we have 2 public comments this evening. The first is from Jamie Mayo, who will be followed by Lori Altman.
Mr. Mayo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and also council member. My name is Jamie Mayo, and I'm here representing Richard Wright, who is running for State Senate, District 38. He wanted to be here today, but he's in a forum somewhere else, and so he could not make it tonight. I actually wanted to say just a little bit on, I know we only have 3 minutes, but Mr. Wright is a CPA. He had a GED, but then he became a CPA, and he's very interested in economic development. I'm looking at all of the presentations that was made tonight, and I understand economic development. He understands economic development, transportation, infrastructure, those type of things. I mentioned to the mayor earlier that I served as mayor in Monroe, Louisiana for 19 years, and on the city council for 6 years. And of course, I talked to him as a consultant about the importance of representing local government, because that's very important. And I know sometimes you get left out, municipalities, as relates to state government. So he wanted me to come to be in his stead to say hello to you. I think a portion of Sandy Spring is in District 6. Councilman Baymans, I hope I said your name right, in his district. And of course, very small part, this is a new district. And so he wanted to make sure that we let you know that. So we ask for your vote and support, and just want to let you know that. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Mayo.
All right.
Thanks for being here. Ms. Altman.
Hi, I'm Lori Altman. This is Dr. Jimmy.
You can pull that microphone down if
Okay.
it's more comfortable for you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for letting us speak. Dr. Jimmy and I are here to discuss the benefits of having a food forest in the city of Sandy Springs. Sandy Springs is considered a modern, developed city. In doing my research, it has become clearer and clearer that our city can be developed into not just a place where people work, shop, eat, live in a disconnected way, but with natural beauty, free food, beautiful perennial gardens, and education for youth as well as adults. Connecting with nature calms the soul, and with this craziness of the world right now, we could all use the benefit from that. Food forests also bring connections among the residents. With community connections, there is less crime. Think about how much better off kids would be if after-school activities included working in the gardens or even playing in the gardens. Yes, it would be made to withstand the kids playing. Scientific studies have shown that people who play in the dirt receive health benefits. And also, after listening to the talk before, maybe we could create places to attract more commercial interest with those. Food is getting more expensive, and we all need to come together to solve quality food insecurity. Organic food is out of reach price-wise for most people with families, and even the organic produce from Canada, Mexico, etc., loses many of its health benefits in transit. If for any reason we cannot get our produce shipped to us, whether that is for geopolitical, weather, economic reasons, then we will have more interest. Now, what is a food forest? How much time do I have? Okay, a food forest is also called a food garden. It's a diverse planting of edible plants that attempts to mimic the ecosystems and patterns found in nature. Food forests are three-dimensional, with life extending in all directions, up, down, and out. And they're generally 7 layers of a garden, and it's done with food and different layers: herbaceous layer, root layer, ground covered layer. Using these layers, we can fit more plants in an area without causing failure due to completion. We can do it with 1/4 of an acre or however many acres we need. It doesn't have to be like a whole big set area.
All right, 30 seconds for me. Well, very simply put, food forests, agriculture, gardening, whatever fancy name you want to call it, has tremendous health benefits. Numbers of studies have shown that. Having it in a city setting like Sandy Springs, a lot of beautiful architecture and infrastructure, can be a life-changing and game-changing thing for all of the community members of the Sandy Springs community. My 30 seconds is up.
Well, thank you. It's I think, Ms. Altman, you've talked to me a little bit about it, and Mr. Paulson. It's something that we can maybe take a look at and see where opportunities may lie.
Okay.
But thank you for
Also,
bringing
I sent you guys today, I don't know if you guys received it, some information about it, different articles, and it's happening all over the country as well as in Atlanta, South Atlanta.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, thank you.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda? Mr. DiGiulio. We have a motion by Mr. DiGiulio. Is there a second? Been moved by Mr. DiGiulio, seconded by Mr. Paulson, that we approve the meeting agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question is on approval of the meeting agenda. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The meeting agenda is approved. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Mayor Paul,
Ms. Rochelle.
move that we approve the consent agenda for Tuesday, May 7th.
We have a motion by Ms. Rochelle. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved by Ms. Rochelle, seconded by Ms. Mueller, that we approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question is on approval of the consent agenda. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The consent agenda is approved. Moving to the first item of business, will the clerk please read the item?
Agenda item number 2024-103. This is ABL number 106259. Consideration of approval of an alcoholic beverage license application for the May Restaurant Group doing business as Colonial Kitchen. This is presented by Chief Financial Officer Tony Carlisle.
Ms. Carlisle.
Good evening, Mayor Paul and City Council. This is a change of ownership for consumption on the premises of beer, wine, and distilled spirits. The May Restaurant Group, LLC, DBA Colonial Kitchen and Bar, 5600 Roswell Road, Suite A110, Sandy Springs, Georgia, 30342. The applicant, Sokia May, has met all requirements and staff recommends approval.
We have any comment cards? All right, we'll close the public hearing. You've heard the report of the Chief Financial Officer. What's the desire of council?
Mayor Paul,
Mr. Baumann.
move for adoption of agenda item 2024-103, request for alcohol beverage license for May Restaurant Group, DBA Colonial Kitchen.
Got a motion by Mr. Baumann. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Baumann, seconded by Ms. Rochelle, that we approve agenda item 2024-103, the alcoholic beverage license application for the May Restaurant doing business as Colonial Kitchen. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question's on agenda item 2024-103, approval of the alcoholic beverage license application for May Restaurant Group. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The item is approved. The clerk will please read the next item.
Agenda item number 2024-104. This is consideration of a resolution to adopt the 2024 CDBG Annual Action Plan presented by Planning and Zoning Manager Michelle McIntosh Ross.
Ms. McIntosh Ross.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Staff has prepared the 2024 Annual Action Plan, the AAP, which is a summary of the annual activities for the use of the funds from the CDBG program. And as you know, the city is committed to continuing the implementation of the sidewalk program on Roswell Road and Hope Road. At a previous public hearing in March, it was announced that the AAP was available for public hearing and comment. Public review and comment for 30 days. The public comment has since closed and no public comments were received. Staff has prepared the AAP as required by HUD, and tonight the city can take action on a resolution to adopt the 2024 Annual Action Plan for the CDBG program.
All right, you've heard the report of the planning and zoning manager. What's the desire of council? Oh, excuse me, we got any public comment cards? All right, let me close the public comment period. You've heard the report of the planning and zoning manager. What's the desire of council?
Mayor Paul,
Mr. Paulson.
I move approval of agenda item 2024-104, resolution to adopt the 2024 CDBG annual action plan.
A motion by Mr. Paulson. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion by Mr. Paulson, seconded by Dr. Kelly, that we approve the adoption of the 2024 CDBG annual action plan. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question's on approval of item 2024-104, adopting the 2024 CDBG annual action plan. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The item is approved. The clerk will please read the next item.
Agenda item number 2024-105. This is consideration of a resolution to approve the 2024 Capital Improvements Element Annual Update, also presented by Planning and Zoning Manager Michelle McIntosh Ross.
Continue on.
Okay. All right. If you recall, at the April 2nd public hearing, you approved a resolution to transmit the city's draft Capital Improvement Element, the CIE, annual update for regional review. I am pleased to report that the CIE was approved by the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. Therefore, the city can proceed with adopting the CIE annual update. Tonight before you is a request to approve a resolution to adopt the 2023-24 Capital Improvement Element, the CIE annual update.
All right, you've heard the report of the planning and zoning manager. What's the desire of council? Oh, I'm sorry, public comment, and I had it marked right there. No public comment. All right, now you've heard the report of the planning and zoning manager. What's the desire of council?
Mayor Paul,
Mr. Paulson.
I move approval of agenda item 2024-105, approve the 2024 Capital Improvement Element annual update.
We have a motion by Mr. Paulson. Is there a second? Second. Been moved by Mr. Paulson, seconded by Dr. Kelly, that we approve agenda item 2024-105, adopting the resolution approving the 2024 Capital Improvements Element Annual Update. All in favor of the motion, or any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The item is approved. The clerk will please read the next item.
Excuse me, agenda item number 2024-106. This is consideration of a resolution to approve a Metropolitan River Act or River Protection Act certificate for River Corridor Review RC 2304SS for property located at 6270 River Overlook Drive, presented by Planning and Zoning Manager Michelle McIntosh Ross.
Continue on.
Yes, so the applicants for this River Corridor Protection Act is located at 6270 River Overlook Drive. It's a 0.7-acre single-family lot in the Riverside neighborhood. It's zone RD27. The applicant is proposing to construct a covered deck and to extend a portion of the house. The Atlanta Regional Commission has reviewed this application with the finding that the project is consistent with the Chattahoochee River Corridor Plan. Given this determination, it is staff's recommendation to the Mayor and City Council to approve this resolution to authorize the Metropolitan River Protection Act certificate for this property located at 6270 River Overlook Drive.
All right, thank you. We received any comment cards? We'll close the public hearing. You've heard the report of the planning and zoning manager. What's the desire of council?
Mayor Paul,
Mr. Baumann.
I move that we adopt agenda item 2024-106, request for approval of the Metropolitan River Protection Act certificate for River Corridor Review for the property at 6270 River Overlook Drive in District 6.
We have a motion by Mr. Baumann. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved by Mr. Baumann, seconded by Ms. Mueller, that we approve agenda item 2024-106, the Metropolitan River Protection Act certification for 6270 River Overlook Drive. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question's on agenda item 2024-106, approving the Metropolitan River Protection Act certificate for River Corridor Review located at 6270 River Overlook Drive. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Thank you.
The item is approved. Moving to new business, the clerk will please read the next item.
Agenda item number 2024-107. This is consideration of a resolution to approve an appointment to the City of Sandy Springs Planning Commission. This is presented by Mayor Rusty Paul.
We have one last vacancy on our open position on the Planning Commission. Mr. Reed Haggard has been serving in that position, and I am renominating him for appointment. The Planning Commission's biggest complaint right now is they almost feel like they're unnecessary. They haven't had any projects lately, and so I'm pleased. I think all of you know Mr. Haggard. He's headed the Riverside Homeowners Association for several years and very active in the community. So with that, I'll entertain a motion.
Mayor Paul.
Ms. Rochelle.
I move that we approve agenda item 2024-107, a resolution of a reappointment to the City of Sandy Springs Planning Commission of Reed Haggard.
We have a motion by Ms. Rochelle. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, I'm going to give Mr. Paulson, I guess. All right, we have a motion by Ms. Rochelle, seconded by Mr. Paulson, to approve agenda item 2024-107, the reappointment of the City Springs Planning Commission of Mr. Reed Haggard. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question's on agenda item 2024-107, the reappointment to the City of Sandy Springs Planning Commission of Mr. Reed Haggard. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The item is approved. The clerk will please read the next item.
Agenda item number 2024-108. This is request for consideration to approve 6 contract awards for on-call materials sampling testing services for the City of Sandy Springs and to authorize the city manager to execute all contracts. Presented by Public Works Director Marty Martin.
Mr. Martin.
Mayor and Council, good evening. Tonight I bring before you a recommendation to approve 6 contract awards for our on-call materials sampling and testing services in direct support of our incredibly active construction program this year and in the next few years. The city recommends that we award contracts to those on-call material sampling and testing services to the 6 firms listed below. And the services would include site investigation, inspection such as asphalt, pavement inspection, concrete inspection, etc. Sampling of cast concrete cylindrical specimens, i.e. the concrete test, the brake test, etc. that we do. Drilling, sampling soil and rock, compaction testing, etc., associated directly with our construction projects. Using on-call as a basis for this contract award, it gives us relatively quick access to these consultants as we enter into each of these construction contracts. To the purpose of this request for proposal, on January the 31st of 2024, we issued the request for proposals. Purchasing conducted a non-mandatory pre-proposal meeting on February 8th, and procurement process closed on March 5th, 2024, with the receipt of the 7 firms for proposals. An evaluation committee reviewed the results or reviewed the proposals provided, and then scored each of the 7 consultants with the following criteria in mind: project team experience and qualifications, project team resources and workload capacity, technical approach, and past performance references. Based on the scoring and the anticipated needs of the city, staff recommends that the 6 top firms scored in that review be awarded contracts: Nova Engineering and Environmental, United Consulting Group, ECS Southeast, WSP USA Environment and Infrastructure, S&ME Incorporated, and Goodwin Mills Kaywood. With UES Professionals solicited the 7th, determined at this point, with 6 was far more than adequate for our anticipated needs. With that, staff recommends award of these contracts, which will be a base year and then 4 renewal years for on-call materials testing and inspection.
You heard the report of the Public Works Director. What's the desire of council? Mr. Paulson.
Move approval of agenda item 2024-108. Approve the 6 contract award for on-call material sampling testing services for the city and to authorize city manager to execute same.
Motion by Mr. Paulson. Is there a second? Moved by Mr. Paulson, seconded by Mr. DiGiulio, that we approve agenda item 2024-108, the 6 contracts awards for on-call material sampling testing services for the city of Sandy Springs, and authorize the city manager to execute. Any discussion?
Mayor Paul.
Mr. Paulson.
So, Marty, how many of these firms are already working for us, have worked for us in the past on this activity?
Virtually all in some capacity, and of course the time I've been here, so which is pretty extensive. But virtually all we've had work experience with in the past here, Councilman.
Okay, good.
Ms. Rochelle.
How many samples do we do a year?
In the case of these on-call materials testing, it depends on the work of the construction contract. So for X amount of concrete that's installed in the project, you pull the concrete cylinders to get strength test, et cetera. You inspect, for instance, compaction as you build a retaining wall. You may even have to do additional tests in support of construction of that retaining wall to check the suitability of the earth underneath and see if it needs to be augmented or materials removed, replaced, et cetera, as a part of that. So it's a variety of tests they can perform for us in support of the elements of construction that we're delivering at any particular time.
And we just pay when as needed.
So what we'll usually do for these projects is the consultants are provided the scope of work, the plans that go with each of these projects, and we get quotes for them on relative order of magnitude based on the amount of concrete. And we have an amount of concrete that's going to be installed as a part of the bid schedule that goes with the project. Here's how many concrete test standards, GDOT standards in particular, will require. Here's the number of compaction tests we believe will need to perform, et cetera. And we agree on that scope as well as their pricing, which they provide to us as a part of the schedule they give us with this competition.
Any other discussion? Any of these folks do any of the rock sampling along Orkin Lake?
Or anyhow, where we need rock sampling or test drills, whatever for that, these folks can do that, or select among them can perform those tests as well. So
if they did that one, let's have somebody else do the future rock sampling for us.
We do have that capacity within
just teasing
the consultant stable we have.
All right.
So,
any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question's on agenda item 2024-108, approving 6 contract awards for on-call material sampling testing services for the city of Sandy Springs. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The item is approved. The clerk will please read the next item.
Agenda item number 2024-109. This is consideration to approve a contract award to Vertical Earth, Inc. to construct the High Point Road pedestrian crosswalk project and to authorize the city manager to execute the contract. Presented by Public Works Director Marty Martin.
Mr. Martin.
Mayor and Council, in this case, we are now able to take to construction the requested and budgeted just a couple of years ago High Point pedestrian mid-block crossing on High Point Road near Forest Hills Drive, project number T2305. In the interest of placing this project under construction, the city issued an invitation to bid on February 21st of this year, seeking bids from qualified contractors to perform the work. The following 4 responses that were received on March 22nd, 2024. They included Vertical Earth at $186,620, NGT Group at $199,400, Construction 57 Incorporated at $222,900, and Omshiv Construction at $313,000. Upon review of the responses, the staff recommends that the lowest, most responsible and responsive bidder, in this case Vertical Earth, be awarded this contract at $186,620.38.
All right, you've heard the report of the Public Works Director. What's the desire of council? Mr. DiGiulio. Motion by Mr. DiGiulio. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Rochelle. Any discussion? Mr. DiGiulio.
Marty, thank you for keeping after this. This has been a long, ongoing project that the people in the High Point area have been looking for, and I appreciate you keeping on it and getting it done.
Yes, sir. And again, with our staff, I think they've had good communication and dialogue with the neighborhood as we define the requirements to make a successful project here. So,
Thank you.
thank you, sir.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question's on agenda item 2024-109, approving a contract award to Vertical Earth to construct the High Point Road pedestrian crosswalk project. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The item is approved. The clerk will please read the next item.
Agenda item number 2024-110. This is consideration to approve a contract award to Vertical Earth, Inc. for construction services for the Powers Ferry Road Sidewalk Project, that's S2-177, and to authorize the city manager to execute the contract. Presented by Public Works Director Marty Martin.
Mr. Martin.
Mayor and Council, in this case, in the briefing that, in the report that Caitlin Schenkel provided to you a little earlier this evening, She referenced sidewalk gap fills as one of the things that we should attack and have been attempting to attack to make improvements in the Powers Ferry area. This particular sidewalk project will provide sidewalk connectivity at the northeast corner of New North Side and Powers Ferry, connecting back to the neighborhood and toward, again, the Fulton County Administrative Building just down the street there. So with that, plans to construct approximately 326 linear feet of sidewalk along Powers Ferry Road. The project includes a mid-block, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon crossing, a small gap-fill section of sidewalk by the driveway at 6190 Powers Ferry Road, and associated improvements. On January 3rd of this year, the city issued an invitation to bid for those projects, seeking bids from responsible and responsive bidders to perform this work. Questions were due on January 29th of this year, and 9 bids were received by the February 12th, 2024 deadline. Among those, in priority order, NSEW Incorporated, the low bidder, was found to not be GDOT Prime pre-qualified as we reviewed those bids. Therefore, we deemed them non-responsive and non-responsible, not meeting that minimum bidding requirement that we established. So we recommend not moving forward with award to them. Next low bidder, Ride Grading, provided a bid at $162,783. Upon reference checks with Ride Grading, we found one references provided indicated work that was not of what I would term suitable scope and scale for the work anticipated here. And we further found a nearby municipal client who challenged the overall responsibility of the proposing contractor and their recent experience with a contractor in their particular city. So it's with those recommendations and research that we recommend we consider Ride Grading non-responsive and non-responsible, which moves us to the third low bidder, now in this case Vertical Earth Incorporated at $187,916, which compares relatively favorably with the engineer's estimate of some $179,551.
All right, you've heard the report of the Public Works Director. What's the desire of council?
Mayor Paul.
Mr. Baumann.
Actually, this is one of the things that I most enjoy doing is approving sidewalk projects. So with that said, I move approval of agenda item 2024-110, approve contract to Vertical Earth for construction services for Powers Ferry Road sidewalk project S2177.
Have a motion by Mr. Baumann. Is there a second? Second. Moved by Mr. Baumann, seconded by Ms. Rochelle, that we approve agenda item 2024-110, awarding a contract for sidewalk construction to Vertical Earth on the Powers Ferry Road sidewalk project. Any discussion?
Mayor Paul.
Mr. Baumann.
So, first of all, it's a great project. I mean, this is one I've heard about for many, many years for people that want to safely get across and down to the river. But let's go back to the 2 bidders that were ruled out. Let's start with Ride Grading, which clearly you've made the case for, based on the references not including them. Were they, what was the term, GDOT are they a GDOT pre-approved vendor?
They were GDOT Prime pre-qualified, yes.
Okay, so
they met that
interesting
test.
Okay.
However, the performance based on reference checks did not measure up.
All right, so then that leads me to NSEW, but for the fact that they were not GDOT Prime pre-approved, would they have been? Or you didn't do any of the homework?
When they didn't get past that stop, we moved on to consideration of the next.
And
We've always
they
held a fairly consistent line on the prerequisite for them to be GDOT Prime pre-qualified.
Yeah, so
as entry.
Obviously, this hasn't happened that I can remember where we had this situation. So it does call into question, maybe for a later date, to tell us what it means to be GDOT Prime pre-approved. And, is it all that, given the fact that here we have one of those folks, and does that call into question that approval, or that is even a standard? And then the second question would be to the first group, NSCW, do we go ahead and notify them of the reason that they weren't picked and say, hey, you might want to go ahead and get this prime pre-approval because you were the low bidder and we didn't even get a chance to review
Yes,
your?
and in nearly all cases, within our invitations to bid, that threshold to bidding, the requirement that they be GDOT prime pre-qualified is announced. It's usually in boldface as a part of the invitation to bid when we go out for bids. So we established that as a bidding standard many years ago.
And I'm sure the results are a matter of public record, but, this was we don't know what would have happened in that case. So I can't draw any conclusion, but I can certainly raise a question about the pre-approval requirement and that standard and what is required for somebody to maintain and continue that standard. I do very much appreciate that alone is not the answer, that you then go ahead and have other qualifying factors, and with the references being one of the most significant ones. I mean, vertical earth's a name we know, but when we're not accepting the low bid, that's something that always creates higher scrutiny for this body, and so that's just going to raise questions down the road.
And in years past, we have disqualified low bidders for that very reason, that they didn't meet the GDOT prime pre-qual. So we have a
right, but here we had a GDOT prime pre-approve that you're rejecting for other reasons.
Yes, sir. Correct.
That would argue for somebody, if there's a standard that goes with GDOT prime pre-approved quality, that I wonder what is going to go into their future review with other places, and whether there's a notification that goes to GDOT. I mean, I don't want other jurisdictions having to, deal with that. This is a real red flag.
Right.
In this particular case. So I appreciate the explanation.
Yes, sir.
Well, I know Mr. DiGiulio will remember this. When we first started the city, the pre-qualification, GDOT pre-qualification was not a factor, and we got burned. And so we were looking for a way to assess the qualifications of contractors to come in and do work and really be professional, be able to deliver what the plan said. And we came upon the GDOT pre-qualification requirement as a reliable standard about the professionalism and capabilities of the contractor. Is that a fairly accurate discussion?
That's pretty
description.
And that also indicated so many of our transportation construction contracts are underpinned by GDOT standards and specifications. So at least with the knowledge of that process and the contractor's efforts to go through that process to become qualified, it gave us a more reasonable assurance that we had. They had the understanding of those GDOT standard specifications.
And the reason we accepted it at that time is it would have required our staff to go through and do the pre-qualifications.
Right.
So this was just a simple check the box. GDOT's already certified this contractor's capable, so then we don't have to do any further. It's kind of like the GSA contract or off the DOAS contract. You don't have to go through the bid process if you buy off that contract.
Yeah, and just to clarify, to be very clear, I'm not questioning that one bit at all. I understand I've been around for a long time. What we haven't had often is somebody that does meet that GDOT pre, and then they fail on other bases, and that's what I wanted to highlight here. Was that that was maybe not completely unprecedented. We've definitely had people that didn't meet qualifications, but from my memory, there hasn't been many situations where we had somebody that met the GDOT standard, and I'm very glad that we've evolved as a city that is not the be-all end-all situation here, because we might have ended up with without the further reviews. So for that, I appreciate it,
Yes,
and I understand what the mayor's saying.
Yeah, not to cite any particular contracts, but we did have others that passed that GDOT prime pre-qualification in years past, and then subsequently were unable to deliver the construction project once we got into mid-construction.
So it's a threshold factor, but
Yes,
not
sir.
a decisive factor.
Exactly. And it's not an infallible method either. Ms. Rochelle.
It says number one was not GDOT qualified at the time of bid. Are they qualified now?
I do not believe so.
Okay.
So, and the pertinent issue is there at the time of bid. That's when we draw the line.
So, Marty, it's fantastic that we have due diligence, so we have our checks in order, and we do our own follow-up, right, on the reference checks. So just a question, when we do find a situation like this, do we ever go back to GDOT and let them know that we found maybe this contractor isn't performing, or do we just let that go? And
more so we let it go, because I don't want to necessarily conflate a reference check that we perform on a particular project with a particular set of skills in mind and our local needs with the standards GDOT applies for prime pre-qualification. So that they may be absolutely qualified for other work, just
Okay.
we didn't think not
Fair
to
enough.
consider.
Thank you.
Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. And all good questions, good discussion here. One question I've got is, I can't remember last time we had 9 bidders for a project that was under $200,000.
Councilman, this is good
Is
news.
this some kind of
Yeah.
indicator of life going forward, going to be
So
a little more competitive?
actually, this is good news. So we're seeing a more robust bidder participation, especially in these sidewalk projects, as we get so many of them out on the street here. So it's encouraging to see that. We hope the interest in the
That's
keeps up.
fantastic. Thank you.
Mr. DeGiulio.
Marty, don't we have, in order to get a cooperation with GDOT in the money situation, doesn't the bidder have to be GDOT qualified for them to contribute to the financing of some of our projects?
There's a separate bonding test, and Dan, but there's a separate bonding test that we also pursue as a part of our contract award, separate and distinct from the GDOT prime pre-qualification status. So contractors are required to provide a bid bond at the time of bid, and then a performance bond, again, bonding capacity, at the time of construction contract award.
But will GDOT give us matching money or cooperative money if it's not GDOT qualified?
In the case of this contract, this is all T-SPLOST funded, so
Right.
we're on our own. Oh, yeah, so there's a construction agreement with GDOT when we're into GDOT.
That
Yes, sir.
requires us to do that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I thought so, all right.
Any other discussion? All right, hearing none, we'll call the question. The question's on agenda item 2024-110, approving a contract award to Vertical Earth for construction services of the Powers Ferry Road Sidewalk Project. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The item is approved. The clerk will please read the next item.
This is agenda item number 2024-111. Consideration to approve a settlement and release of claims agreement by and between the City of Sandy Springs and Registry Glen Community Association for the replacement and improvement in community-owned property as it relates to the Mount Vernon Highway Corridor Improvement Project, and to authorize the city manager to execute the agreement, presented by City Attorney Danley.
Mr. Lee.
Mayor, Council, this is a property that's part of the Mount Vernon Highway Corridor Improvement Project. It involves a proposed deal with Registry Glen HOA. You'll see on the monitor that this runs a great length of the subdivision. And the staff, first let me tell you, did a great job with the designers of moving this off of the individual properties. It is unaffecting of 17 homes, which was a great coup, but it affects the landscaping of the fronts the roadway for the whole length of the subdivision. And the appraised price of $99,900 is for the property and the consequential damages of the loss of the old growth landscaping on the property. This proposal was reached some time ago, and Registry Glen wanted to see the insurance policy of our contractor, so we had to wait till the award was made to the contractor before we could get the proposed agreement together. And that is the recommendation that staff and I would make to you tonight, that we settle this for $99,900.
All right, you've heard the report of the city attorney. What's the desire of council?
Mayor Paul,
Ms. Mueller.
I move that we approve agenda item 2024-111 to approve a settlement and release of claims agreement by and between the City of Sandy Springs and Registry Glen Community Association, Inc. for the replacement and improvement of community-owned property as it relates to the Mount Vernon Highway Corridor Improvement Project, and to authorize the city manager to execute the agreement.
We have a motion by Ms. Mueller. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Ms. Mueller, seconded by Dr. Kelly, that we approve agenda item 2024-111, a settlement and release of claims agreement by and between the City of Sandy Springs and Registry Glen Community Association. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question is on agenda item 2024-111, approving a settlement and release of claims agreement by and between the City of Sandy Springs and Registry Glen Community Association for replacement and improvements of community-owned property. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The item is approved. Moving to reports. Today was day 40 after the end of the legislative session, the last day for the governor to sign or veto bills. Generally, vetoes are the highlight of the last day. He did sign the budget today, which has some money for a lot of things that we'll be competing for down the road. There were a couple of interesting. One, a bill that he signed, I'd reported on before, that allows the local governments to file claims against promoters and organizers of unpermitted events. So if we have party houses or other groups that come in and organize, they don't get a permit, and they cause overtime for the police department or the fire department, or they cause damage, then we can file claims to recoup those costs if they're unpermitted. So the governor signed that. One surprise was the veto. There was legislation that raised the state homestead exemption from $2,000 to $4,000. He vetoed that today. Of course, there was a lot of other homestead exemption and other tax bills in there that I reported on in the past that he signed. So today was the last day. He either had to sign or veto today. So the legislative session is now officially over, and there are a lot of laws, and we'll kind of go through those maybe at the next meeting, just to give everybody a quick overview of what the impact of the city is going to be. But those were two fairly significant ones that I thought you might want to hear about. We had hosted the Sandy Springs Interfaith Association, Clergy Association here at City Springs today. Great turnout. I try to meet with the Clergy Association once a year, and so this year they decided that they would come to me rather than me go to them, and we had a breakfast here. About 30 members of our Clergy Association, clergy in town. A very good conversation. I talked to them about some of the challenges that we have in suicides and drug abuse and overdoses, and how they may be able to help deal with some of the societal concerns that are there. We had in this room the other night an Asian award meeting, and I want to say thanks to the chief and Gerald Green, one of our officers. We had a situation where we had to make an arrest in the room, and they did it and nobody noticed. Nobody noticed that they had to escort somebody out and who had warrants on them, and they were sitting closer to me than Miss Mueller. So I barely noticed what they did. It was a very professional move by your officers and by you. I saw the chief coming like a battleship across there. I knew something was up. So I just want to say, having witnessed that personally, I won't read you the email or the text message he sent me, but he wanted me to know when it was okay to arrest the guy. Sooner rather than later if he's sitting next to me, but it was, anyway, congratulations again. It's just another example of what our first responders have been able to do. Concert season has started. We had the concert by the Springs on Sunday, a good turnout, everybody had a good time. And, of course, we had the Friday night concert before that. And then we've got Sundown Social that starts this Thursday night. And so got a lot going on. Concert season started. Legally Blonde is running in City Springs Theater Company. It's a cute little performance. A lot of energy. They burn a lot of calories in that thing. There's a jump. I won't spoil it for anybody if you haven't seen it. There's a jump rope sequence. I don't know how in the world they do the jump ropes and sing and stay on key, and with bouncing up and down, that their vocal cords don't show the vibrato of the movement. But it's a very cute show. So a lot of things going on, and so we just kind of covered everything from my perspective. Mr. Baumann.
Thank you for that list, and I would add that a couple of weeks ago the farmers market opened to a massive crowd. Several of us were there, and Erin's doing a great job I appreciate that, and it's good to see everybody out. And the new lawn is being used extensively. I think Eden mentioned to me, I was up in her office yesterday, that she sees people out there very frequently, so I'm glad to see that. Just a couple other things, if I may, Mayor, briefly. First of all, the discussion we just had earlier, you never know where it's going to come from, but on a simple agenda item, we go through our agendas, and often without discussion or comment, and 6-0, and here we had a fairly simple sidewalk project, which led to, I think, the council at its very best, seeing something and asking really good policy questions and checks and balances when we, on an error on the side of low bid contracts, but there are checks and balances. It was great to hear that conversation, and I wanted to note that. Finally, I want to note the loss of a person from our community since our last meeting. He was a friend of mine and a mentor for 35 years. Jim Comerford, who lived up in the Huntcliffe neighborhood. I had known Jim from my first law school 1L clerkship back in like 1988. I mean, it's an amazing thing and then I worked with him for a few years until we went separate ways. He had worked with Pierre Howard, a former lieutenant governor, and I knew him for many years, and then we had a 18-year break in between, and then I got involved in Sandy Springs and found Jim in Sandy Springs, and he was an innovative businessman, a lawyer, and above all, he was the recent head of Huntcliffe HOA, and above all, a really devoted family man and a community member, leaving his wife Camilla, and they had just had a new grandchild, Abigail. I mean, literally a week or two before his sudden and untimely death. So I want to make note of the loss of Jim, who was a really good guy for the community, a good friend and a mentor.
A member of the very first Economic Development Council we had.
Mayor Paul.
Mr. Paulson.
Thank you for bringing that up, Councilman Bauman. I went to the service, and the church was packed. So there were people from all parts of the state that came to visit him. And I heard a story about him. He was a presidential campaign button collector. And he had a whole wall behind his desk and one across from his desk of campaign buttons all the way back to, I guess, Dewey.
Had you seen it?
No, I saw the picture.
I actually have a picture of it.
That's fantastic.
I was at his house a week or two before his death, and he took me to his basement. And he had a relationship with, Russ, you'll appreciate this, with Dr. Sabato, I think it is.
Larry
Sabato, the political science, UVA. And in fact, donations to the library. And I think, I'm guessing that collection goes there. I actually have a book he had lent me when we got together, and I was looking at it last night because I finished it, and I got to give it back to him on Governor Wilkie from Michigan, and in it, and I opened it up, and I didn't know if I was rushed to get it back, but there are buttons in that. He was a button collector.
Cool. Anybody else? All right.
Yeah. Okay. So, since we're talking about Mr. Comerford, listening to you, Andy, just made me think of my most recent Jim Comerford story, where he essentially, he gave me 2 books on Barbara Jordan, who I had never. I'm gonna be honest. I didn't know who she was, and that's the problem. Yeah, so he, and gave me this long spiel about Watergate and things like that. But that was fairly recent. But I definitely it is a significant loss. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up and making me remember that. Thanks, and my condolences.
All right. Any others? All right. Any staff reports? All right, we need an executive session on real estate and litigation.
Mayor Paul.
Mr. Paulson.
I move we suspend regular order, move into executive session for the purposes of real estate and litigation.
We have a motion by Mr. Paulson. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Paulson, seconded by Mr. DiGiulio, that we suspend regular order, move into executive session for the purpose of real estate and litigation. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. We are in executive session. We shall simply come back into this room and reconvene, return to regular order, and adjourn. There will be no further business conducted tonight. He was an attorney. Mr. Paulson. Mr. Paulson moves that we close executive session and return to regular order. Is there a second? That's Mr. Baumann seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. The question's on the return to regular order. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We are in regular order. Mr. Paulson moves adjournment. Is there a second? Motion by Mr. Paulson, seconded by Ms. Mueller, that we adjourn. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We're done at 8:27.